Manuel. Can we get him a microphone, please?
Thank you. Well, the Pacific Alliance, as you're absolutely right, is moving along, and it has become a deepened production platform for the 4 countries plus Costa Rica, which is in talks. Now, in
Did we mention the 4 countries? It's Mexico, Peru,
Colombia, Peru, and Chile. Those of us who believe in markets, so Mercosur has been a bad joke for the last 15, 20 years. And I suspect that it will continue to be a bad joke for a while. Now, in relation to TPP, we don't know if it's going to pass or not. It's a big burden to pass the legislatures of all the countries, particularly the US.
Manuel, give us a question, please.
The issue here is that if TPP doesn't pass, TPP in many respects would override the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, because it goes beyond that. If TPP doesn't pass, we have a lot of work to do in NAFTA. And with Justin Trudeau in Canada, it will be much easier than with the previous administration. Finally, in relation to global warming.
But do you have a question, please, Manuel? You had your panel. Give us a question for our panelists.
No.
Great.
You asked a question about the cost of global warming.
Now I want you to give us a question. Pose a question to us. If not, we're going to pass on to the next question.
Okay.
Thank you. The next question, please, from the audience. If not, I have a question. I have a bunch of questions more. One is on competitiveness.
Got a question here to your left.
Let me get my question out, and then we'll go to you on that here. And another one here from David. Competitiveness. We've used that word a few times. It's the great lament of Latin America. And the narrative is now that Latin America had another boom period and didn't take advantage of that boom period to become more competitive in certain industries. Innovation, entrepreneurship, venture capital, that's the sexy discussion these days around the world. Here in Miami, it certainly is. Are there places in Latin America that are becoming competitive, that are talking the same game about innovation, about venture capital, about startups and so on? Or is it missing that boat completely? Eric? John? All of you guys.
I'll just speak from a personal example. One of the great laments I have, and I spend most of my time focusing, as you can imagine, on natural resources. If you're a country like Peru, and your minerals account for 2/3 of your exports, if not more, you can develop a core competency, including technology, around minerals. So it's not just about taking rocks out of the ground, but it's a very complicated ecosystem which includes technology. It includes geotechnical analysis. It includes making complicated machines that go into the ground and can tell you if you have minerals. And that ecosystem could include the universities, the entrepreneurs, et cetera. And it could also include universities in the United States that have these programs back and forth. So, you know, the great lament that I have is that even in areas that where Latin America has a core competency, there hasn't really developed that level of entrepreneurship that I'd like to see. I don't, unfortunately, think that Latin America is going to develop, as robust a biotech or IT ecosystem that you're going to see in Silicon Valley or Boston. But you know, what I'd like to see is more investment on the things that Latin America is very good at. So, seeds, for example, best-in-class soybean seeds or best-in-class cacao, things like that.
John?
If I could just quickly, last night I was asked to give a lecture to a group of young entrepreneurs, a company called the Founders Institute that operates in 100 cities across the United States and works with startups, really interesting organization. And they pointed out that the Kauffman Foundation puts together an index that measures the sort of entrepreneurialism of different cities across the United States, and Miami is now #1. Which really astounded me. But I think one of the reasons is, and I think the people sitting who are the people taking this course and who are participating, 90% of them were very bright Latin Americans who either felt they could not develop their ideas in Latin America, or they, they had tried and run into problems, and so they'd come to the States. And that is usually what happens. And the reason it happens is rule of law. I mean, if you want to narrow it down to one factor, it's that. Venture capital is reticent about spending money in Latin America because they're reticent about their ability to defend their IP in the court systems in Latin America. And until that changes, you don't build that ecosystem that supports entrepreneurialism. So Latin America is a very creative place. There's lots of entrepreneurs, but it creates about 0.5% of the world's patents in a region that's 10% of the world's population and 9% of the world's economy. There are 8 universities in the United States, each of which produce more patents than all of Latin America's academic, private, and government sectors each year. So it is a serious stumbling block. Even Latin American business that is looking for new technology is reticent about fostering it at home. It's just easier to go out and license it from the Americans and the Japanese and somebody else. And so for all those reasons, I continue to be pessimistic about it in Latin America, in spite of all the politicians who say they're building the next Silicon Valley in their own country.
Please give us your name and affiliation, please.
Anitra Thorhog, Yale University. I'm going to ask particularly Mr. Bethel, but also the rest of the panel. I see China as being very strategic and long-term in its thinking and buying up areas that have particularly good water. And because they are running out of water, they're going to need agriculture, which takes 59% of the water in the United States. And they see this, and it is a value added, which somebody... do you think that some of these business arrangements that they're now making for import, export, and so forth have a longer range and fuller relations between the entire hemisphere, but particularly the water-rich countries like Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, for China? Because I see the thing from long range and from general hemisphere.
Right. You're absolutely right. The situation in China from a water standpoint is dire, right? You can classify water category 1 through 5, and more than 2/3 of China's water can't be used for anything but navigation, right? That's surface, well, perhaps including aquifers. So you can't use it for agriculture. You certainly can't use it to drink. And for those of you that have visited China, particularly in the north, you know that it's essentially a desert, right? And you've got 1.4 billion people, limited agricultural land, limited water. The greatest infrastructure project in the world that no one's ever heard of is a colossal canal that's being built in China that goes essentially from the south, where China does have some water, all the way to the north. It may be an environmental issue, who knows? So the short answer to your question is China is indeed looking at ways of feeding its own people. Look, at the end of the day, it's a question of national security. If you can't feed your people and there's a revolution, well, bad things happen. But China's not alone in looking to acquire land overseas. You all may be surprised to know that South Korea did a deal with Madagascar. I want to say it was in 2007. I don't know if you guys remember this, but they bought something like 20% of the island of Madagascar. It caused a revolution. Again, you can Google this as well. I'm full of non sequitur facts here. But so the point is, China's not alone. There are a lot of countries that are land and water deficient and that are looking to go overseas to acquire land, principally, because of the fact that China doesn't have enough water.
David, do you have a microphone? Here you do. You do now. Give us your name, David.
Yeah, David Adams. I'm a journalist with no particular affiliation right now. One of you, I think it was John, may have been Eric, mentioned that China may be looking to invest in large infrastructure projects in Latin America. Have you seen much activity in the alternative energy sector? I know that there was a very nice project that the Chinese invested in Panama for wind very recently. Have you seen much other activity in wind and solar, say, from the Chinese?
Well, I mean, the Chinese have either they've built it already or it's on the cusp of being completed. But the Coca-Cola-Sinclair hydro project in Ecuador, and that's being done by Sino-Hydro. That's a very large, very well-known project. There's a Chinese company called Envision that's invested in Mexico in wind. There's a Chinese company called Sky Solar that's made a very large multi-billion-dollar investment in Chile in solar. So, the short answer is yeah. I mean, the Chinese companies are looking to do that, partially driven by export sales. Chinese wind turbine companies like Goldwind and others are looking to export as many of their products as possible. So they, in combination with the China Development Bank or the China Exim Bank, are financing a lot of these projects inexpensively so that the Chinese producers can sell either the photovoltaic panels or wind turbines.
We have time for one more question, right here, up front.
Yeah, let me, before you take that question, Ian wanted me to talk just very briefly. Throughout our conversation, you'll notice that the common denominator has been the impact of natural resource pricing on our economies in Latin America, good or bad, and the impact. And I'm the first to emphasize that correlation, but I think politics sometimes does really matter. And, in Argentina, I think we're going to be really pleasantly surprised by how quickly a change in politics can usher in new capital and economic vibrancy. Just on the cusp of Macri's second round electoral victory, you had all kinds of deals waiting to go through. Here in Miami, you've got the Related Group run by Jorge Perez, who has been sitting on a deal now for about 6 months in Puerto Madero in downtown Buenos Aires. And the day after the election, they made the announcement. Our own subcontractor affiliate in Buenos Aires closed 4 different deals the day after the election of market studies that are going to lead to investment in Argentina. So it's amazing how quickly things can change. In Venezuela, this morning, the Comisión Nacional Electoral finally recognized 112 of the 167 seats will go to the opposition. That's huge. That's 67.1%. That's a super majority. That, under the Venezuelan constitution, grants the legislation huge powers to basically govern Venezuela.
Okay,
now,
John,
will it be respected?
You're cut off. You're now into the third panel.
But what I'm saying is 6 months from now, we may see a vastly different situation in Venezuela if they're able to exercise that power.
Okay.
And that opens up all kinds of new opportunities.
One last question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just call me sir, that's fine.
Yes, we are the same generation.
Yes, indeed. Give me your name.
My name is Erickson de Paula. I am a professor at the University of Miami, the College of Engineering. I arrived here in 2010 as a research scholar, and after working 40 years in the energy industry. And I began participating in these conferences of the Center for Hemispheric Policy done by this great team, Susan and Susian. Just want to give you both my congratulations. After 40 years, I have to tell you that I learned a lot in the energy arena. And I would like to thank you very much, give you my congratulations. I think lots of people will join me on giving you the congratulations to you, Susie, and your team. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, one question.
Quickly.
We have different views here. I took note, time to invest, positive growth, and at the other side, challenging on investing in Latin America. This is my area of specialty. I would like to know from the great distinguished speakers, what were their perspectives regarding, I am a small investor, I would like to know what about capital expenditures from the oil industry in general considering technology in production, reduction of costs, and at the end of the day, dividends to pay to the stockholders. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, it's not very bright, the outlook. For 2016, the numbers I've seen floated around, capital expenditures have been cut by about $200 billion in the area of energy. It's a global basis. And going out 5 years, you're looking at projects that have been postponed or canceled in a range of $600 billion. So if you're looking for capital to do energy projects in Latin America, good luck.
Okay. That's the end of our panel. Thank you, guys. Thanks, John. Thanks, Eric. And thanks, Ed. And we're going to move right into the political panel. This is the last panel today. Bruce Bagley, come on up, and Ed Gamarra and Susan.